Welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. Because if you're on this call, you probably are a wholesale change agent. My name's Ian Heller. I'll be your co-host today, along with my business partner and friend, the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bein, PhD. How you doing today, Jonathan?
Ian, I'm well. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. So, we're happy to be with you today. We have a very special guest who I'll introduce in a minute. But first, we'd like to thank Epicor for their support of this broadcast. For nearly 50 years, Epicor has helped distributors stay ahead with flexible, powerful solutions designed to increase sales, streamline operations, and improve customer experience. Epicor's industry-leading distribution ERP solutions are built specifically to meet the unique needs of wholesalers, with everything needed to grow your sales, profits, and productivity while distancing yourself from the competition. Epicor is focused on the things that matter to you. Work queues, PO variance queues, kitting, assembly and production orders, advanced inventory forecasting, VMI, and special project pricing. They build their software using industry best practices and 50 years of distribution experience. But Epicor solutions are far more than just tools for pick, pack, and ship. Fully cloud-based with a modern UI, Epicor offers complete, robust e-commerce solutions, powerful BI and analytics tools, modern API and EDI, value-added services, WMS, virtual assistants, and much, much more. You can learn more about how Epicor helps thousands of wholesalers succeed by visiting epicor.com. Okay, and belatedly, there's the Epicor slide. So let me now introduce our guest, someone I've known for a long time. When I was working at Grainger, he was annoyingly smart. He wasn't annoying about it. He was just annoying to me because he was smarter than me. And so I knew him when he was VP of marketing at Grainger. He came from Bein company at the time. And then he went through a variety of roles there as SVP Business Development and International, SVP and Chief Strategy Officer. And he's currently the chairman of the board at BlackHawk Industrial Supply and operating partner at Snow Phipps. He's got a Harvard MBA and a BA in mathematics and economics at Colgate University. Please welcome to the show, Mr. John Schweig. John, how are you today, my friend?
I am, I'm terrific. So can you see me and can you hear me?
You look great. You sound great, John.
Well, tell my wife, thank you.
You know, it's funny, whenever I fill out like an emergency contact, I put Penny Heller, long-suffering wife.
Well, you know, it's...
You don't know what to say because you know it's true.
Telling the truth is important, and that's good. That's good.
Good. All right, let me turn off these slides again. And so, John, you know, you have a sort of a different career path than a lot of people in PE. When I looked at your background on LinkedIn, I didn't realize you were actually an entrepreneur before you went to business school.
Yeah, I would say sort of, it was a bit of a unintended entrepreneur. Growing up, we had a family business. It was a manufacturing business making adhesive tape. And it was, my father tragically was dying of cancer as I was finishing up college. And he'd maybe this was like my beginning to private equity, because he financed a new business all on debt, and a bunch of things went wrong, and I found myself in a very unfortunate position of having to go in and try to run his business after he died. With Colgate was a great school, but it's not like they prepared me to go run a manufacturing business. We ultimately made some improvements, sold it to a competitor, but I wouldn't describe it as a thriving success, but I learned a lot of really important things. A lot of them were kind of tough, but yeah.
Yeah, I've actually been involved in a couple of unintentional nonprofits as well. So then you went to Harvard Business School, and then I met you when then you went to Bein. You were a partner there.
Yeah.
And then you became the VP of marketing at Grainger, where I worked for you about 23 levels down, right? And
well, it wasn't 23 levels, but Yeah, so I got to, I wasn't trying to be a distribution specialist at Bain, but it kind of worked out that way because I had a couple distribution clients and I was with Grainger, working with Grainger for 5 years, which was phenomenal. Was the partner working with Bain for quite some time. And when we stopped working with Grainger, I really missed it.
Yeah.
And so I left Bain to come to Grainger in I guess 1990, and all of a sudden found myself in charge of the iconic Grainger catalog and a bunch of other things, and had a lot of great experiences, which I can go through or not
Yeah.
over the ensuing 20 years.
So I want to come back to that in just a minute, about sort of your takeaways from those roles. But you were there. How many years were you at Grainger?
So consulting for 5 years and then working there for 20.
Wow. Okay, good. Yeah, I was there 15, but we overlapped. You were there the entire 15 years that I was there, actually. Oh, wait, no, you weren't. You were there for about the last 10.
Yeah.
And then, so then you went, you led business development. You also led the international divisions and for a while,
Yeah.
and you led the direct marketing business as well, which was not just a marketing channel. That was actually the small customers, right? So that was a general management role.
Yeah. So sort of in brief, the sales reps were going after larger customers, and they really didn't have time to spend much time with the smaller customers. That segment was shrinking, and they were somewhat unattended. So my group picked up actual P&L responsibility for that. We did some really cool stuff. Admittedly, it was a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel because they'd been neglected for a while, but certainly I would say that we had some really talented folks that did a great job kind of reviving that. Had M&A and business development and innovation and all sorts of neat stuff along the way. Yeah, I did ultimately have responsibility for all the international distribution as well as sourcing. And I guess what I would say is that running things for a really big company like Grainger is great for the ego. But in reality, I think I learned over those 20 years that I got at least as much enjoyment and maybe more out of working with really good operating executives to try to help them succeed. And, maybe it was the old consulting background, not sure. But I was probably also better at that. And so in 2010, which was now 20 years later, I went off to try to build a career doing pretty much that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been great. Honestly, it's been fantastic. I've had a great time. I've worked with a bunch of super folks.
Yeah. So, but that background, sort of entrepreneur at a young age, in a very difficult environment. I mean, you lost your dad, and you're inherited this company, and you don't have any experience at that. And then you become a consultant at Bain, so you see different kinds of businesses. Then you're in a corporate environment for a while with a mix of operating and strategic roles. That's a unique preparation for a PE career, I would imagine.
Well, I think so. What really made it interesting, so PE firms, there are a lot of really smart financial folks, and I'm not kidding. They're the folks I work with, they are really bright, but they haven't run businesses. They know they haven't run businesses, and they're sort of self-aware enough to know that if they're going to buy a business and try to make it even better than it is, which is always the objective, trying to have folks that can help cause that is really helpful. And so my job as an operating partner is to kind of bring my operating experience and my network and, God forbid, my judgment to bear, so that with the financial folks in the private equity organization, we can really help what are very good operating teams take their businesses to new levels. So I do think it's been it's been a great ride. I will say that without trying, it turned out that my career path has set me up pretty well to do this, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, so let's switch over to sort of the the main topic of today, which is how
Sure.
PE firms and leaders evaluate distribution companies. And I want to start with something you mentioned a few minutes ago, which was the point in time at which Grainger had neglected their smaller customers, and as a result, customers weren't growing like the account managed customers. Now, our experience in consulting, John, is we see that this is actually a current problem for many distributors, where they have an outside sales force that's elephant hunting, and they're competing with all the other distributors who have elephant hunting sales forces. And that's a rational thing for salespeople to do. You want to allocate that expensive resource to the customers with the most potential. However, most distributors with which we interact do not have a good, telephone-based set of account managers. They call them insights. They have groups called inside salespeople, but they're customer service. They're not really doing account management over the phone, and they don't have good marketing tools for digital marketing or direct marketing. And as a result, they're not getting that higher margin, lower cost to serve, less competitive mid-market and small market business, which feels to me like big opportunity. Do you see that as you look at distributors?
Depending on who they are, the answer is absolutely. It's pretty instinctive for distributors to want to go after the largest accounts. The people making the most noise and the most money are their sales reps who are very motivated to get those large accounts. We have certainly seen it. We've invested in companies where that was a challenge. Without going into great depth, finding a way to make sure fabulous customer service people are not necessarily great outbound sellers.
Right.
It takes
in fact, they're almost necessarily not.
Well, often that's true, right?
Yeah.
There, and those of you who are distributors out there, you've witnessed this firsthand. It's one thing to have someone call you up and they decided before you picked up the phone that they wanted to talk to you, and they want something. Calling them up and trying to get them to pay attention when they know you're probably trying to sell them something, that's pretty different. And so a lot of times it's been about reorienting the thinking. That's one. Number two, and I'm hoping to avoid some hate mail here, but a really good inside salesperson is worth at least as much as a really good outside salesperson. They're productive, they're hard to find, et cetera. And so trying to help companies create a career path where staying in inside sales can be lucrative, can be really important. And then there's all the metrics and trying to put other things together. We'll talk, I'm sure, some more about e-commerce, but that's a huge piece as well, right? Because that is an amazingly efficient way and a more and more common way for small customers to find you and for you to find them.
Right.
So John, let's step back a little bit here and understand, really help our listeners understand, why is it that PE firms like distribution? We hear about all the venture capital folks that are going after tech companies. Why do PE firms like distribution?
Good question, and boy, do they ever. I think there's a few things going on. Financially, cash flow. Distributors convert a ton of their profits into cash flow. And if you think about it, private equity firms usually finance a lot of their purchases with a decent amount of debt. So great cash flow helps make the interest payments. It helps bring the debt down. And they can also tend to raise a decent amount of debt to make those acquisitions, because banks and other lenders, they love to lend to distribution because the assets behind it are receivables and inventory. It's a whole lot less risky to put $1 million against inventory and receivables than against some completely purpose-built piece of machinery that, is enormous and could never really be sold in the event that the business started to head south. And so, financially, that's, I think that's a lot of what's going on. There's a couple of strategic things as well that I think PE firms really like. We've all seen it and we see it more and more. There are industries that get sideswiped by technical advancements in products or maybe some kind of a service innovation. And that can turn a business upside down. It can happen in distribution, but generally if a new widget comes out that displaces the old widgets, a lot of times distributors can just pivot to the new solution, and they're a little bit less at risk than other kinds of business, and PE firms like that. Finally, and I know we'll talk a lot about this, distribution has relatively low barriers to entry, not always, but it's not that hard to, set up shop as a small distributor. You may make it, you may not, but it's not that hard to set it up. That makes for a pretty fragmented sector of the economy. And so a lot of the distribution specific markets are kind of ripe for consolidation. And for reasons I'm happy to sort of quickly describe, PE firms
Please do. Yeah.
They love to be involved in consolidation. Do you want just a word?
Please go on, please.
Yeah, it's remarkably simple and remarkably powerful, and it comes down to one thing. Large companies sell for higher multiples than small companies do.
Right.
And so let's say I own a large distribution business as a private equity company, and I paid 10 times EBITDA for it. Well, I can potentially go out and buy another 3, 4, 5, 7 smaller distributors, maybe at 5 times EBITDA, 6 times EBITDA. If I do a really good job of integrating them, and maybe even get some synergies, which is a bonus, when I then go to sell that business, all of that combined EBITDA, I'm hoping I can get 10 times or even more for it. And that's just a really lucrative model of buying something at a lot less than you eventually can sell it for.
So you might be buying those companies at a 6 or 7 or an 8 multiple on EBITDA. Is that rough range?
Yeah, it really does depend on size, Jonathan, and it also depends on whether that business is growing or not, et cetera. But it could be 4 times in certain cases. It could be 8 times, but you've got a pretty strong belief that when you sell the overall business that you've now combined, there's going to be a real step up in the in that multiple that you're able to put it back out there at. So go ahead.
So I think this brings us to another point, though, about consolidators and consolidated. And it's something that I think will inform our listeners who may or may not be involved in a private equity situation. Ian and I are of the opinion that there's going to be a lot of consolidation happening in the next few years. Forces of disruption, the move into digital. A lot of companies don't have the resources to scale into this decade. So it's going to sort pretty quickly into those that consolidate and those that are consolidated. In the private equity world, there's the concept of a platform business. Take us through what that is about, platform versus add-on or bolt-on, as you call them, and how that might inform how distributors on this call think about their own business.
That's a really good question, and thanks for bringing it up, because it's really important if you own a distribution business to have a sense for what you are. So a platform business, which was what we usually call it, is one that we think is set up well to be the initial investment in an industry for us, upon which we can then bring on add-ons or bolt-ons to integrate it with. They are more valuable. Makes sense. They're bigger, but they're also valuable because it's the mechanism through which you're really going to pull this off. And so who wouldn't want to be a platform business? But it comes with some requirements. To be a platform business, first of all, you need to have some size, and it depends on the aspirations of the PE firm as to how big that might need to be and the market you're in, et cetera. But we'd be looking for a seasoned, scalable executive team that we think could perform well if the business grew 50%, 100%, 200%, because that's what we're hoping to do. And we're looking for folks that hopefully have had at least some experience in acquiring and integrating businesses, because that's part of what's going to need to happen.
So let me interject there, John, because I think there's a common paradigm or assumption that people make that when PE firms buy a company, the first thing they do is fire the management team. And that's not been my experience. And what you just said is the opposite. So can you go through, so you're saying that the talent of the management team is actually part of the consideration set when you're looking at a distributor, because you don't want to replace the management team. You want one that can scale with the business. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. Now, mild sidetrack, there are private equity firms that have linked themselves with executives in residence, quote unquote, who are looking to get the private equity company to buy a business that they can go run. That's not something we do, but it does happen. But generally speaking, private equity firms, the last thing we want to do is buy a business and then have to change out the executives. That is slow, it is expensive, and there's no real guarantee you're going to go find a better person or group of people than what was there. We would much prefer to find and pay up for great talent. If there is a reputation for changing out management teams, I would say it's only because the private equity community has figured out that you can get great results out of great talent. And if there is a need, hopefully not up front, but eventually to change out one or two people or to add talent, we will certainly do it. But I'm glad you raised that, because I think it's a real misnomer that's kind of standard operating procedure. If anything, it's the opposite. What I will say though is if you have a distribution business and you're thinking of selling, you can look at the track record of various private equity firms and find out, whether that's something they routinely do or not.
Got it. Okay.
And so coming back to the platform, so you're looking at management talent that's got runway. What are the other aspects of a platform? So part of it's about people. What is it about the business that makes it a platform, aside from scale?
Well, scale's a biggie, but I think ability to scale is the overriding concern, and that touches talent, and it touches systems. If you've got an ERP that just does a great job, but it would start creaking at the hull if you were 50% larger, that's not insurmountable, but it's not as attractive. If you have processes that are built around, doing things completely differently every single time you do a transaction or whatever, that's hard to scale. I would say that if part of what the firm is hoping to do is to potentially buy other distributors in other locations, if you already have more than one location, so your company and your people are familiar with operating in a multi-site environment, all the more helpful. So I think the implication for those folks that might be watching would be, if you aspire to be a platform, and frankly, who wouldn't if you've got a lot of the pieces, you may have some work to do if it feels to you like maybe you've got some holes in the talent side of the house. Maybe your system needs work in order to scale, et cetera. Does that help?
Absolutely. So it's interesting on the system side. We've seen a company who is now private equity backed, but was running this for a long time prior to being private equity backed, where they had developed a competence in pricing, and they had gotten 400 basis points higher gross margins. Their balance sheet was just spitting out cash, right?
Yeah.
And so they took that cash, and that became part of their platform. And they just remember the game Pac-Man. I think we're old enough to remember.
Sure.
Pac-Man, right? They just gobbled up anything worth acquiring within 300 miles. And then within 18 months of acquiring the bolt-on company, the bolt-on company's pricing margins were performing like the platform company.
Yeah. That's such a neat example because it describes that there are any number of things that one could find about a platform business that you as a private equity firm or any firm believe could be applicable and duplicated with additional acquisitions. There's some companies that are doing a great job right now. I wouldn't call them distribution, but they have figured out how to sell really well on Amazon. And they're gobbling up $1 and $2 million businesses that are on Amazon because they know they can triple and quadruple the business within a year. So it's just, if you have a knowledge set, a technology, anything that you could apply to add-on acquisitions, I would say fantastic. More often than not in distribution, it's going to be things like the ability to apply your purchasing leverage across them. Maybe you figured out some things about pricing. There's the cross-selling of products in both directions. That's a lot of the essence of how you get even more value just over and above that issue of the multiple increase.
Do you model at a financial level the benefit of purchasing in the new entity before you make the acquisition from time to time?
I would say we would certainly evaluate the platform in how well we think they buy. And everything's a double-edged sword. If they don't buy well, that depresses its value. But if we think we know how to make that better, that makes it frankly even more interesting to us. Because paying top dollar for a business that's perfect, that's a great business to own. It's not always a great business to buy, because you have to figure out how you're going to find a way to take a great business and make it even better. We absolutely, in looking at bolt-on businesses, we will compare cost of goods and see where we think we might get some leverage. And that's a big piece of it, sure.
So John, a couple of people have jumped in and said, well, if you are if you're not the platform company in a roll-up, or consolidation, you're one of the follow-on businesses that's bolted on, those management teams may be, at least the CEOs may be more at risk because you wind up with too many people at the top. And that seems like a fair point to me.
Well, it certainly can be, and I think it sort of depends, right?
Right.
Let's imagine that it is a new location. We had a marvelous business in Memphis that was our platform. We bought a business in Boston that was a bolt-on. The guy that ran it was incredible. He was no longer chief executive officer of a corporation, but he was our leader there.
Right.
He provided great value back to us as overall ownership, and invested in the forward-going thing, did really, really well. So it depends on what's needed, and it depends a little bit also on some people running businesses can't imagine not running a business.
Sure.
Some would love to take on, I'm chairman of BlackHawk. We've bought businesses, and a number of the CEOs of the businesses we have acquired are in the business, holding significant roles.
Yeah. So this is a nuanced thing, right? And I'd also imagine if you are part of a company that gets acquired by private equity, you might find that group may have other opportunities for you over time. It just feels like the bottom line is you need to produce results as well as you can, and that creates opportunity for you in your career, whether you're part of a PE acquisition, part of a independent company. It's all about being able to drive results.
But it's
Yeah,
also,
I think that's right. And the early conversations in any of these things is, what do you like to do? What makes you happy? Do you want to stay on and help drive the business? Are you trying to cash out? How important are you to the customer relationships? And those are a big deal. I mean, price is a big deal, and so are other things, but that ends up being a pretty big conversation.
but it also depends on the integration strategy of the consolidator, right? If you are a house of brands, which Ian and I have seen in both the construction world and in the industrial world, there's probably a decent chance, tell me if this is right, that you can retain something like the role you had if you're a house of brands. If you're becoming an integrated brand and there's just going to be one brand for the company, there's going to be fewer seats left at the end of the day when those are done.
I think that's generally right, Jonathan, or the seats are different. If it is a house of brands and basically what's being integrated are very back-end things, you might find that you get to run a lot of stuff, and what you've gotten rid of are all the headaches you always hated. That can be fabulous, right? If it is going to run more like, let's say, a branch of something that is a little bit more uniform, it could feel like being a super branch manager, and it really depends on how much degrees of freedom you have in that, as to whether you're motivated and excited about it. Again, there are folks that end up being able to take a lot of money off the table for what they've built. Someone has removed most of the headaches and fears that come along with owning a smaller business, and some end up really, really enjoying that role. And it has a lot to do with the nature of the business that's acquiring you, and it has a lot to do with your own kind of mental makeup as to what makes you happy.
So I want to talk about other factors that you look at besides talent now, John, but I also want to remind our listeners that they can submit questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'd love to get questions. We ask all the ones that we can. But there are other factors besides talent, right? There are factors you look at in terms of the customer base, the supplier base, the services and technology. So can you kind of run us through that matrix?
Yeah, absolutely. I can sort of hit them one at a time. I'll hit the ones you mentioned. I think maybe it's helpful to kind of in pretty staccato fashion, so we move through it kind of quickly, to say, here's what makes, let's talk about competitive position. This is what makes a distributor valuable. Here's what we would see as red flags, and here's things a distributor could do to increase their value. And we could kind of do that for each. Competitive position, if you are a market leader in a pretty well-defined niche, and that niche is big enough for you to still have runway, private equity loves that. For kind of obvious reasons, it makes you a more obvious platform, but you either do or could have a cost advantage over your competitors. And that means you can invest more in talent, in systems, in additional acquisitions, whatever it is, to actually help you even gain more and more shares. So we love that. red flags would be a niche that is so tightly defined that there's not much room to grow. Or if you have 90% share of the market, good for you, but there's not very far to go.
Right.
So if that is you, trying to branch out into maybe some very nearby adjacencies. Maybe those could be products, maybe it could be customer segments you don't sell to today, maybe it could be geographies, so that you sort of provide more runway, and a potential buyer can see that there's more runway. Those would be pretty good moves to set yourself up to look more attractive to private equity. You mentioned customers.
Yes.
Generally speaking, we want to see and love to see stability in the customer base. Buying a business and losing one of the really big customers right off the bat, that's not fun, and it's hard to come back from. So we like to see stability. We also don't like typically to see a huge percentage of the business all wrapped up in just a very small, 2-3 accounts for the same reason.
Right.
That kind of feels risky. To the extent that you're sort of in that situation, finding ways to diversify a bit. Don't recommend getting rid of the large customers as a way to accomplish it, but finding ways to attract other customers should certainly help. I would also say, though, with customers, just maybe the most important thing in addition to the customers, you got an established track record of attracting and growing new customers, because the notion that there is a growth model in place, that is so valuable. If you don't have that, and you're a distributor, you're working on it. And I'm not sure there's a magic wand other than sales and marketing talent, and maybe, frankly, talking to customers and prospects about what's holding them back. Because the red flags would be declining sales per customer, declining new customer acquisition, whatever.
John, I would say, though, that when we deal with distributors, most of the time when we ask things like, what's your churn rate? How many new customers are you getting per year? They don't know the answers to those questions.
I think that's an accurate statement. By the time a distributor gets to the point where it's offering itself for sale, let's say, especially in an auction, if there's a banker involved, they're already asking, they're asking them to go kind of get that bit of information. The knowing your churn rate is really important, because, and it's sort of an old cliche, even if you're great at pouring water in the bucket, a big hole at the bottom really takes all the fun out of that. So understanding your churn and understanding what to do about it, that's a really big deal.
Any warning signs on the vendor side? So one thing that comes to mind is there are industries or companies that are dependent on, say they are a Rockwell distributor, and they've got a dependency on that, right? I mean, it's a great thing for them in many ways, but if you lose it, your business is very damaged. Are there some warning signs you look for on the vendor side?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we do like, obviously, is great stability in the vendor side. If you've got a large vendor that you lose soon after the acquisition, once again, that's really hard to come back from. So that's great. What we don't like to see typically is 1 or 2 suppliers that represent a huge portion of your business, such that if you did lose it, you have a major problem. A mitigating factor there would be if you are one of their absolute largest distributors in a territory, or even generally speaking, that would suggest a little bit more of a stable relationship. It also suggests maybe a little bit of pricing power. a warning sign in addition to that, there are some distribution industries where, especially for the larger end customers, it's sort of like the supplier has too much control over that end customer. It feels like they're almost the ones securing the customer and setting the price, and they're all but kind of rewarding you by servicing the account. And it sort of feels a little bit more like a commission than it does distribution. That, that can work, but that's a situation where you don't really control your own fate.
Yeah.
And so that's a little less attractive to us. This is easier said than done, but if you're in situations like that, or you are really beholden to a small number of really big suppliers, are there any ways that you can diversify a bit so that while this other issue isn't going to go away, it's not the entire business?
Right. Right.
What about the role of value-added services in terms of creating a moat around the business, and how that gets rolled into any bolt-ons? How do you look at value-added services?
Well, I punt on that for 1 second and talk for just a moment about products and pricing, because I think that's where the value-added services issue kind of comes to roost.
Okay.
We like products where you get higher turns when you're selling products people like, no surprise. You get better margins when you have a higher share of the products that you're selling. So, if you're $100,000 distributor of a brand and you've got folks in your market that are selling $2 million, I don't think you're setting price. Mm-hmm. Other direction, yes, you are. So worst of all situation, of course, would be someone who's selling basically Me Too quasi-generic products and they just don't have much of a share to them because the turns aren't great and the share is not great. Nirvana, boy, if you have a private label that people in the marketplace actually know and like, well, that's best of all possible worlds, right? I would say that if you are in a situation where you are selling mostly Me Too products, that's when value-added services start to really come in as a way to protect yourself, but also to start helping you with your margins. And especially in the world of Amazon and and a lot of new internet-only suppliers, if you have value-added services that would either be pretty difficult for them to offer, or you can't imagine them getting around to it, that's a level of protection that is really important to private equity. By the way, it can be a level of protection against companies that aren't necessarily internet-based, but are just huge. Because you can probably, making this up, as a $20 million distributor, there's a lot more personal, complicated things you could do that it might be hard for a multi-billion-dollar company to offer without having their whole world sort of spin apart. One thing I would suggest, and I hope I can describe this well, to the extent that the services are wrapped around the product themselves, that is, in my mind, really valuable because, I think we've all been there. I've been there. Let's say you're talking about technical assistance or something else, and the customer soaks you for all of that, and they're a fabulous consumer of all of your great service. And then they go buy stuff from other people. Worst of all possible worlds, you have this expensive thing you do, and it's not actually causing customers to buy from you. But think about other things where they don't really get the service other than in the product. And I'm thinking of things like kitting, calibration, testing, installation. These are things that happen actually with the product itself. And I think those can form really great levels of protection. And I'm really glad you brought this up, because with business, I've looked at an awful lot of businesses over the last handful of years, and a distributor that has what we feel is a really defensible set of value-added services that protects them versus one that doesn't, that can be worth 1 times, 2 times, 3 times EBITDA. It is a big measurable difference, or it could be just, sorry, not interested. So if those are, advice would be, first of all, when you think about your value-added service, be honest with yourself. If you say, oh, our folks know a lot about the product, great, important, is that enough?
Everybody says that, by the way, right?
What's that?
Everybody says that, by the way.
And by the way, everybody says that. And if you ask 50 distributors what make them unique, they will probably all cite the exact same things, suggesting they may not be that unique.
Right.
So, I would say be brutally honest with yourself and say, is your list of value-added services nothing other than a list of what you do and what you're proud of? Or are they things that actually really would make it hard for your customers to get that service and still buy from Amazon or Staples or whatever we're talking about? So thank you for raising that. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Fantastic. This is a quick one, and I know we've got a listener question that Ian's going to share. When you look at acquiring either, well, let's just say the platform business.
Yeah.
How do you think about a family-run business versus an ESOP versus other structures? What works, what doesn't work?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to tell you, I may not be the world's expert on this, and so I'll try, but I think you might have other people you could talk to who are a little bit better than that. The complicated ownership structures are simply something one has to get through. If you're trying to buy a business, obviously in the end, private equity generally wants to own that business. Mm-hmm. They love to have the person who sold it to them heavily invested moving forward. And it's a great way for the person who sold the business to make even more for the business they sold. And that's how a lot of wealth creation happens for folks that sell their businesses. Something where you've got 43 owners with a lot of rights, et cetera, that's going to make it really hard to convey the business. It can happen, but but the private equity firm, I don't think is necessarily the one that wants to go sit there and try to convince all 43 of them. That's work you might need to do. An ESOP involves some regulatory kinds of things that I may be a little bit less familiar with. That might need to be unwound. So family owned, great. They may be they're typically less experienced in selling, so there's probably a bit more hand-holding required, which we're more than happy to do, of course, to help them. But we might ask for things that no one's asked them for before and have to sort of explain what it is and why it matters to us. If they have a lot of family members in the business, if they're good people doing great work, fabulous. And if they want to stay in the business, as employees, fabulous. So I think that's fine. I mean, the reality is most distribution businesses started that way. It's just a question as to whether they've been sold somewhere along the line.
Terrific. Thank you.
So, John, when you look at distributors and you see, I mean, there are disruptors moving in. Everyone talks about Amazon, but Home Depot is probably a more imminent threat to a lot of companies because they're buying MRO distributors. They're threatening to electrical distributors. Um, is that a growing part of your consideration set when you look at a distributor, or do you see that as, well, I'll just stop there.
Um, yeah, I mean, yes, in one sense, we obviously, we're looking at two things simultaneously. Well, three things. How good is this business?
Mhm.
Some PE firms are prepared to do tons of heavy lifting and go and buy a business that's not very good, and a lot of, for which they won't pay a lot, but where they're prepared to take all the steps to make it better. And that can be very, very, it's frustrating, but it can be very lucrative. Um, uh, I'll speak for us. We tend to look for very good distribution businesses that run well.
Mhm.
We're then looking for two things on top of it. What do we think we can do? Whether that's based on the operating, role that I have, or the networks we have, or things we've tried to do elsewhere that we think are going to work to make that thing even better than the business it is. And we're also thinking about where could some problems be hiding. If that's Amazon coming in and making it really hard for them, if it is Home Depot buying businesses in their sector, yeah, those are in any other number of factors that could really depress the growth of that business. Sure, we do look at that, and to an extent, it's about. I don't want to come back necessarily to this per se, but a lot of it's going to have to do with the services they provide.
Hmm.
Um, and if they've got great customer relationships and they're providing services that those customers and new customers would value, that might be kind of hard for a company of Home Depot's size,
Yeah.
let's say, or just how as they're buying these other businesses, they're pretty distracted, things they're just not going to get to. I would say that's less of a factor. Thinking about what is it about, Home Depot buys an MRO distributor. What about being owned by Home Depot makes that MRO distributor somehow a bigger threat to
Mm.
some platform business we're looking at? If all it means is they bought them, well, this company's been thriving or not thriving with that competitor to begin with for
Right.
ages. So you want to understand what's the combination doing that might make it different. Just being bought by Home Depot doesn't, by definition, make this competitor you've been up against all of a sudden hugely different, better, stronger.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
sure if that answers your question.
No, it's actually very thoughtful because that is, yeah, that's just a change in ownership, right? And you could argue that there's just as much of a chance that it's going to make it harder for that company to succeed than easier, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a wrap up that I want to roll in. I want to roll a listener question into, but can you give us just a minute or two on whether or not you look at digital capabilities and
Yeah.
what you're looking for if you do?
Yeah, very, very good. I'll try to go through this fast. I'll be I'm going to start with the negative side. If if you're in an industry where people do buy a decent amount online, and you don't have any kind of a digital strategy, e-commerce strategy, and you don't have services that are going to protect you, that's a dilemma. That's something that's going to make me nervous. And I assume it's something that makes you nervous already.
Probably, yeah.
So we'd be looking for signs that you already are at least working on e-commerce. That could be your own site and you're working your way through it. It could be that you're starting to sell through other marketplaces, something the two of you have talked quite a bit about. But something that says you're thinking about it and you're working on it. We've bought businesses and invested heavily in e-commerce capabilities, and happy to do that. But if it's from a dead stop and you've got nothing in place and you have no talent in place, it's not impossible, but it's kind of a heavy lift. So yeah, we do pay attention to that. And part of its mindset, we're looking to make sure that that's on the executive team's radar. Because if it isn't, and we think there's a lot of challengers there, it might be hard, even if we're prepared to spend the money to get the kind of effort behind it.
Okay, good. So here's the wrap up. So we had a listener question, and then I want to expand it a little bit. So the listener asked, if you're looking at a distributor that's had double-digit growth for a long time, but they've given up EBITDA margin to do it, right? So it's negatively impacted their cash flow. So they're, basically discounting to get share, it sounds like. He's asking, what would you suggest they do? So it sounds like a question about a specific company. I'd like to broaden that a little bit, John, as a wrap up. If you own a distribution company and you want to sell in the next 2, 3, 4 years, what should you do, knowing that you might want to sell to a private equity group?
Okay, let me take those sort of one at a time. To some extent, EBITDA is EBITDA. So if you have been gaining share, and maybe it's by investing that reduces EBITDA, maybe it's by bringing on some products that do great, but they have slightly lower margins, whatever. But it's causing the EBITDA to grow, even if the EBITDA margin is down. I think generally that's a good thing. And it depends on whether it's a precipitous decline in EBITDA margin or sort of mild. Because margins matter. A slim margin business has risk associated in the event of a slowdown, in the event of some kind of an increase in operating costs. That can really throw you for a loop. But I'm going to make this up, and if you have 25% EBITDA margins, and by investing heavily and diversifying, you're down to 21% EBITDA margins, but you're growing at a great clip. Hey, 21's pretty good. So I think you're doing a great job for yourself. If the EBITDA itself is dropping and you're growing your revenues and the margin's dropping fast enough that the EBITDA is dropping, that's obviously not very helpful at all. So I would say, I would say sort of keep it up. I also think that if what you have been doing is dropping your EBITDA margin primarily through investment rather than dropping your so it's your operating expenses or marketing or something, as opposed to lower margin products, that's fabulous, because to the extent that you get to the point where maybe you don't need to continue that investment, that EBITDA margin can expand. And so I think that's all good. In terms of just overall advice, I think it depends a little bit. If you are on a couple things, if you're let's imagine you're thinking of selling your business within the next year. Market's hot right now. Maybe maybe you've been thinking about it. Maybe it's a great idea. Well, there's only so much you can do, right? You're not going to completely turn your product line inside out. You're not going to make huge strides in your customer base or your supplier base. You're not going to crash in a new ERP system. There's a lot of things that you just sort of don't have time to do. On the other hand, get your financials in order. If within the next few months or within the year, you're going to have to provide financial statements, if they have a bunch of inaccuracies in them, that's a real problem. So I'd say get your financials in order so that they can be trusted and they're believable. I'd say make progress to whatever extent you can on your margins through pricing and on your operating costs. Now, if it were that easy to do, you would have done it, I suspect. But my main, but sometimes not, right?
Right. No, I agree. Right.
If you're going to sell your business, you might as well get the value associated with taking some of those actions rather than selling your business for less money. Private equity firm's going to take those actions and they're going to get the value. So I'd say work on those things. If you have a bunch of dead or almost dead inventory that you could find ways to convert to a little bit of cash, I would do that because no one's going to pay you for that.
Right.
So it's sort of these tidying up things. The last thing I would say is if you have some things that I might describe as an overhang, like disputes with employees or suppliers or customers, or a really complicated ownership structure, you might want to attend to that stuff because it's just one of those things that start driving the value down a little bit as people think about the risk. And if you can get past that, maybe you can, but if you can get past that, it's now something you don't really have to discuss with a potential buyer.
You don't like to have hair on the deal.
You don't like to have hair on the deal, right? I would say if you're thinking that in the next 2, 3, 4 years, you might want to sell your business, that's a different game. Then I would say, think about some of the things we've talked about. Can you expand your niche a bit? Can you bring on smaller customers that pay higher margins? Can you add a location, or if you haven't made acquisitions, make an acquisition so you can demonstrate this is something you know how to do. Are there any meaningful holes in your executive team where you could bring someone in and now they have enough time to show what they can do? Can you give some of your next level of management opportunities to show that they can handle the big jobs so that someone buying your businesses sees that there's a really reasonable succession plan available? Those are all things that I would do. A thought would also be, this is a time to experiment. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And I'll give you, why don't I give you a dumb example, I suspect. Let's imagine you have 3 branches and you've got 3 ideas that you think are all pretty good on how to grow. One of your options is to pick the one you think's the best and go do it. And God love you, if you guess right, that's great. Right? That's great. But chances are you got about a 1 out of 3 chance of being right. And if you're wrong, you spent the money, you lost a year, and you still don't know what'll work. And that's a waste. What if you tried one of them in each of the 3 locations? I bet one of the 3 is going to work. What's going to happen is you'll demonstrate to a potential buyer that you know how to grow your business at a faster rate. And they're going to look at that and say, wow, if we could implement that across the rest of the business, and that's really valuable. And the part that's even more fun is the 2 things that failed miserably. They're going to see that as a discontinued one-time expense, and it's not going to affect your value at all.
Got it.
So, especially I think when you're thinking about selling to private equity, think about experimenting. It can really mean a lot for you.
Yeah, John, we're getting more questions than we can possibly handle now. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but I did want to just
easy ones.
Well, this is a really easy one. So I just want to clarify. Someone said, hey, when you were using the 25% EBITDA example, were you serious about that level of EBITDA, or were you just using that sort of high number to make the point clear?
I was using that to make the point clear.
Okay.
EBITDA margins, to be honest, EBITDA margins in double digits are terrific.
Yeah, got it.
25 is not common.
So I told him that, I typed an answer to him, but I just wanted to make sure that you were answering it, not me. But yeah, so
that being said, we have actually had 2 clients on a consulting basis who've had that level of EBITDA. So it does exist.
Yeah, and we've owned businesses at that level. And by the way, if that is you, great job. I bet you're a really happy person.
yeah, we don't see it often, but it does happen occasionally. So John, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. And like I said, we're getting lots of people who are telling us how valuable this is. We did want to tell our listeners that our next show is going to be on Wednesday, June 3rd. Our guest is going to be Andrew Larson, who's the CEO of Gustav Larson, an HVAC distributor. And he has really done a nice job introducing innovative services and working on how to derive value from them, how to charge for them in some cases. He's doing a lot of innovative things in marketing, et cetera. We hope you'll join us. You can sign up at distributionstrategy.com. We're also a thought leadership partner with the NAW. Our next webinar is the results of a survey that we're doing of manufacturers about channel transformation. We've learned in our research in the past that manufacturers are planning to sell a lot more direct into marketplaces over the next 5 years. So we're going to explore some of those issues and what distributors can do to make sure they're as valuable as possible to manufacturers. So you can go to naw.org/go/adding value to sign up for that. And if you want to reach John, do you want to give him your email address? Is that
sure.
Putting you on the spot?
Not that anybody could imagine paying me to do this, but I don't really do consulting per se. So that's not something I would do. On the other hand, if somebody wanted to reach out and ask questions, or I would be more than happy to come visit your business and just talk with you about things you might do to increase the value, frankly, because it's fun, and exclusively because it's fun. I am at J Schweig, so it's JSCHWEIG at me.com. It's me.com. And love to hear from you. I'm sure there were a lot of things we could have talked about. If you have other questions, feel free to call me.
Yeah, John, I hope you'll come back if we invite you again. It's really been fascinating. We've gotten tremendous engagement from our listeners, and you've had a lot of value for them and for us. So thanks again.
Hey, I'm always happy to see you guys. You guys are doing great stuff for the distribution industry, and I'm happy to help.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Jonathan, great working with you again as usual. And I hope you all have a great day. We'll see you hopefully on June 23rd. Bye now.
Great. Bye-bye.